Good afternoon, Afro friends and family. Welcome to another edition of Afro News at Noonish. It is September 11th, 2023, and we have a special edition of Afro News at Noonish here today for all of our viewers. Of course, we know that today is the 22nd anniversary of the attacks in New York City, as well as in other cities across the country, in Washington, D.C., at the Pentagon, as well as in Pennsylvania. This is the day that we remember those who lost their lives 22 years ago on 9/11 in the terrorist attacks. Because this is the Afro, we always want to bring the Black perspective, the Black view, and the Black experience to our audiences and our readers. And so today is no exception. We have joining us Mr. Craig Thweatt. He was a firefighter on that day 22 years ago, and he is here with us to share his experience. I also have Afro assistant editor, Miss Ashley Fields. Ashley, do you want to say anything before we get started?
No, I just want to welcome Mr. Thweatt and thank him for sharing his experiences. As we know, this was traumatic for a lot of people, and I'm interested to know how he's able to commemorate it as it comes about each year.
All right. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Thweatt. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
All right, now this is a very sensitive topic. So first, I just want to say thank you for engaging us in this discussion, sharing your experience, sharing your memories. And we do want to be sensitive to you on this day. So thank you. And let's just get started. Mr. Thweatt, can you introduce yourself and tell us how old you are and where you're from?
I'm Craig Thweatt. I am 59 years old, residing in Queens. I grew up in Long Island. And I just retired. It'll be 2 years in March. I did 30 years on the job. So.
Oh, wow. Retired firefighter. All right.
Yeah, it's the best.
So, Mr. Thweatt, can you just take us back to that time period? What was your life like in 2001? Not getting to September 11th just yet, but can you tell us what were you involved in? What was your rank? Just tell us what life was like for you day to day back in 2001.
2001, I was had recently been divorced. I was living in Brooklyn, then moved to Uniondale, Long Island. And one of the things I remember is I wasn't involved with anybody. So it was like a free summer, and it was a beautiful summer. It, like, every day was sunny, nice. I was younger, obviously, hanging out. It was just a really nice time. And probably the most important thing that summer is my best friend introduced me to my then girlfriend, now my wife, on September 8th. It was that Saturday morning. She was hanging out at the Roxy. It was the first Saturday's party. And I was just going to the firehouse because I was working the next morning. So I was going to spend the night there. I dropped my best friend off and I drive away, and he calls me. He said he left his briefcase in the car. I drive back. He's standing on the corner with two young ladies, and he introduced me to my wife. And it's funny how I told her I was a firefighter, and she said she kind of blew it off, like, yeah, whatever. And then 3 days later was 9/11, and that particular day also, when I met my wife, was actually my 10-year anniversary as a firefighter. So it was a lot of significance on that day. So I look at today, I'm very thankful. I have an overwhelming feeling of gratitude that I was spared, because I was working down there that day. I was working near there. This is Fashion Week, and the U.S. Open always collide. So it's really, New York is always popping around this time of year.
Okay. So you were having a hot boy summer. I hear you say you're free.
A lukewarm. It wasn't really hot, but it was good.
Okay. A lukewarm summer. And you say that you met your wife on this day and told her you were a firefighter. So what was being a firefighter like at that time? It was your 10-year anniversary in the department at that time. So what was your day-to-day as an actual firefighter? What did that look like for you?
It was awesome. It's an awesome lifestyle. It's different than the 9 to 5. I worked for Chemical Bank, which is now Bank of America or something like that, or Chase Bank. I did customer service, wore a suit every day, and then I also worked for Dreyfus Investments. I did customer service for them as well, and I was unhappy. And my father actually was a firefighter from 1960 to 1980, and he encouraged me to take the test. So I took it, and he said it was an option. You don't have to. I never thought about being a firefighter ever, even though he did it. But once I got behind the desk and realized I didn't like it, I took a leave of absence when I was called in '91, and then I never looked back. It was it's very physical in a lot of different ways. Just the work itself is physical. Just being in a firehouse with a bunch of men, you have to be physical. You have to have a presence. They have to know that you're on the team to do the work, because when the alarm goes off, it is a total spike in your adrenaline. Because you can imagine, at the firehouse, we have beds, and, we usually lay down maybe around midnight, 1 a.m. Some people are insomniacs because of the job. But when the alarm goes off 3 a.m, and you wake up from your sleep and you hear a fire, multiple calls, children trapped, your heart rate shoots through the roof. So it's very physical, mentally. It's the work itself is hard. Mm-hmm.
You spoke a lot about the people that you work with and spending a lot of time and hours with them, and I'm sure that creates some sort of bond. I wanted to just ask if there were any firefighters that you were working with that year that went through these experiences with you, and if you are still close with them today.
Yeah, it was universal, and it was almost universal just for the occupation of firefighters, because we met firefighters from all around the world who came to support us through 9/11, because it was so devastating. It was nothing has even surpassed that. Even with the wildfires and stuff, which are tough. You're talking about the two of the tallest buildings in the world being hit by 2 jetliners. So anyone who experienced that, anyone who saw that, were kind of bonded by that day. It was like a new chapter in everyone's life happened on 9/11.
Wow. So can you take us to that day? Can you tell us how that morning started off? People say that it was a beautiful day. It was the clearest day. How did your morning start? And what was your assignment for that day? Can you just tell us how things were on September 11, 2001, when you woke up?
I was working my side job, which was, it's Fashion Week. And so they have all these fashion shows at Bryant Park. So when the limos pull up, we just escort the stars to their particular fashion show. And a brother firefighter, Hisham Tawfiq, was working with me. And he was telling me how the night before he escorted Serena Williams. And the first thing I asked him was, how does she look? And he was like, and as soon as he said that, someone said, "Oh my God, a plane hit the World Trade Center." And, we go and look at the TV, and everyone's thinking it's a small plane. And now you start hearing the sirens echo throughout the city. And, a plane hit the World Trade Center. Crazy, right? So, but we still go back to what we're doing. And then the second plane hit, and that's when I told Hisham, we have to go to the firehouse. This is a terrorist attack. And previously they tried to blow up the World Trade Center. And I was working that day too. So it's like very surreal. Once it comes into play of what you think you might see, because once the second plane hit, let's go. So we're heading uptown, because we worked in Harlem at the time. We're driving uptown. A van pulls up next to us, and the guy's screaming, "I almost got killed. I almost got killed." And we're looking at him like he's crazy. And I look at his van. There's a big crease in the van where an I-beam hit it. So he was almost killed.
Wow.
And, we head uptown, get to Harlem, we get our gear, we get on a city bus, we head down. And as we are heading down, the second tower had fallen at that point. And the
Wow.
thing about it that's surreal for firefighters, like anything that goes on in the city, that's an emergency, a fire, anything, we hear it on the radio. So we hear all these radio transmissions about the first tower falling. So now we have a sense, as firefighters, we learn to compartmentalize our fear. You have to. If you think about what we do for a living, you have to compartmentalize the fear and use all the techniques you've learned and try to apply them. But when you're talking about the World Trade Centers have collapsed and you hear the radio transmissions, it really, it's surreal. So you go into another place, you go into another zone, and you just work. And for anyone who was around that time, especially now, I think someone said today, I went to a ceremony today at my original firehouse, which was Engine 59, Ladder 30. It's called the Harlem Zoo. Really, really good firehouse, busy firehouse. And they hosted a memorial service this morning. So I went uptown, hung out, and one of the guys said there's only 1% of the job now worked during 9/11. So it's a cycle. And we just try to, if you ever get a chance, go to the museum. I haven't been to the African American Museum in DC. Shame on me. But I'll be taking my son there. But I always hear how staggering the first floor is as you work your way up. You should definitely check out the World Trade Center Museum. It's right at the site of the Trade Center. And the two big pools are the footprints of the original building. So it's really a sobering place. And, it's definitely a game changer. Even things like I worked in Harlem, I worked in Flatbush, Brooklyn, and then I worked in the South Bronx. So these are neighborhoods of color, neighborhoods that usually get most of the fire duty. The other neighborhoods like downtown really didn't go to fires, but that day, all those companies were wiped out because they were right there.
Wow.
And, anyone who's never been humbled before, once you sign in to be a firefighter, you never know where you're working. It could happen to anybody. And that kind of changed my perspective more than anything, is that we're all vulnerable and not to take anything for granted. So.
Okay. I haven't had a chance to see that actual museum, but I have been down to where the towers used to be.
Yeah, the fountains.
I've seen the fountains and I've heard that list of names in person, and there's just something so, it's heavy hearing all of those names and knowing that each of these names, that was a whole world to someone. That was someone's daughter. That was someone's son. Can you tell us about some of the firefighters who responded with you on that day? And did any of them perish at the site, or what was that like? Did you lose any firefighters from your actual house?
We had Tommy Gardner was in the Engine 59, and he transferred to the hazmat unit, hazmat 1, and he perished that day, his whole company. And then I had other friends, because I had been on the job for 10 years at that point.
Right.
So I had a lot of friends of people I interacted with. And the strange thing was, it's so many people. It was 343 on the job that were killed, that you went to funerals nearest you, because it could be any Saturday. That's when everyone has their funerals. There's one upstate, there's one in Long Island, there's one in Brooklyn, there's one in Manhattan. So you go to one that's closest to you. You don't even know sometimes who you're there for. And I'm standing online, and then someone handed me a program. I look, and the guy who I was there for, I work with him as a side job, but I didn't know he had perished. Because a lot of names also, they were looking for people for years. Some people have never been found, so it's really different. And the one thing that it did was it exposed people to the firefighter's life and what we commit ourselves to. And for a brief moment in New York, people actually would get out of the way of the fire trucks like they do down south. They do. Once you leave New York, people actually move over to the right and let the fire truck go by. Not in New York. Now they just cut you off. People soon forget. So, but it's New York, and it's a very resilient city. It's definitely different post 9/11, but it's still a beautiful place.
Okay. Speaking of that day and all the panic that arose from it, I know that as you're heading in, you mentioned that you are, experiencing feelings of, being vulnerable and other things like that. But after that day, continuing to work in your career, did that change your approach to, going into fight fires and knowing that, at any moment your life can be taken from you? I mean, what was the mental impact of that day, and how has that affected how you live now?
I had a overwhelming feeling of gratitude that I wasn't killed. I never had. A lot of guys experience, unfortunately, they experience survivor's guilt. But I'm strong in my faith, and I never felt that way. I just felt thankful that, okay, now I'm here for a purpose. And actually, we were down there for months digging through rubble, finding body parts, finding wallets, finding this, finding that. And going to fires was a piece of cake. It was like routine because it was actually something you needed to get your mind off of the horrors of the pile. And that's what we called it. We called it the pile. It was a pile of the World Trade Center just bent up. It's unbelievable. Really, it was too much to absorb, and I feel bad for the people who actually witnessed all that stuff in front of them, because I got there after the towers had fallen. There are people, civilians, everybody who were there, saw the people jumping out of the buildings, and, not to be graphic, but you really have to understand how horrifying it was. They said when the bodies hit the ground, it was like someone dropped a can of pink paint on the ground. So people actually absorbed this, and, that trauma, that's hard to deal with. So I'm thankful I didn't see that stuff, but the stuff you see, it really was, it was tough. So for me, it just made me dedicate myself more to being safe at my job and passing on information to the younger firefighters. And I enjoy my career. It's the best job in the world. It really, I enjoy it because I was serving my community. I was, hopefully I was a good example for any kid, because a lot of kids back in the day never saw a black firefighter. It was very close, and the numbers were very low. When I went to Proby School, I was the only black firefighter. If you go to Proby School now, there can be anywhere from 50, which is a good number, and we're getting better. So I tell everyone to take the job, or at least take the test, because you never know. Okay. You never know. It's a great lifestyle. That's all I can tell you.
Can you talk about that a little bit more? How did firefighting itself change before 9/11 and after? Like, what are some things that I imagine it would be much different for a firefighter who signs up, today or tomorrow? So how is it different, with them coming in and being a newer generation?
Well, the first wave after 9/11, I'd say everyone who takes this job is committed, because it's a lot of traditions. If you work in a good firehouse, there are traditions to drill, to practice, to pass on information, because when the alarm goes off, certain, like the places I worked in were busy firehouses. So you took it seriously. When the alarm went off and you're going to a fire and there's a family in there, you take it seriously. And anyone who comes on the job, I think most people want to be in a busy place. They want to do the work. They want to help. It really is God's work. And it's the funniest place to be, because you can have a kitchen full of different attitudes and political views, religions, all in this kitchen. But the bond of we're all going to go out there when their alarm goes off and help whoever the strangers, that we don't know, we're going to help them. It really is. It's, days like today's when you see how precious that is, because I just met guys. One guy was 80. Guy I work with, he's 80 something years old now, still walking around, doing his thing. It's a great job, but it has, it's a microcosm of the world. So you just have to establish yourself, that you're a professional and that you just want to be treated fairly and with respect. Because when the respect wasn't given, you got to tell someone like, yo, you can't do that. You can't talk that way around me.
Okay.
You can talk when I'm not here, you can say whatever you want. But when I'm here, if we can be cool, it'll work out. And that's how I approached it, and it worked out.
All right. Can you take me back to that day and just talk about how long you were there? I see the news stories of firefighters and police officers saying that they arrived early on the morning of 9/11 and people had to pull them away days later. How long were you there, and what were you tasked with doing once you got down to the site?
When you're down there, it's kind of like a conga line of big buckets, and you dump stuff, pass it along, and you're listening for whistles or air horns. The whistle is everyone shut up. We think we may have found someone, and they may have a cadaver dog go by, or they may use a sounding tools to see if they hear anyone tapping. And so, that was inspiring when they found somebody.
Oh, wow.
And even if it's someone who is deceased, it's at least going to give the family some peace. So my first day, I was there, I don't know, to the next morning, and took shifts. We would shower and then go back, shower and go back. And then when it was time for you to work, you would be at the firehouse and go back. So it was like that on and off for like a year.
Oh, wow.
And then they started making details because at one point there were too many people coming down at once. It became dangerous to some degree, but everyone was dedicated to helping find, whether it's a loved one of their own or help other people, just get something. That's why that museum is no joke. You go in there, because there's a room where the registry of people who were killed that they know of, each person's story is in this computer. So when you hit, say it was me, if you hit Craig Thweatt, boom, it'll show you my story in this room. So the people that are in there, we're all trying to maybe find a relative or a friend. Everybody's in there learns about someone else. It's just beautiful. It's very sobering, but beautiful at the same time. So
Yeah. Now, seeing those bodies getting pulled from the rubble is a graphic image for anyone. And I'm sure that day there were many children around, as you mentioned before, and children as you were heading to the site. I just wanted to ask about any dialogue that you heard between a child and an adult, or any stories that you might know of children who lost their parents who are reflecting on that day in pain today.
That I'm trying to think. No, I can't think of anyone directly, any children. For me, my daughters were at the time 2001, so they were 6 and 8. So my first phone call was to their mom, to let them know that I'm okay. And once everything settled down, I would talk to them, because they were out in Long Island, which from the city is like about 45 minutes. But it hit everybody the same, because you could actually see the Twin Towers from Long Island. So there's so many spots around the city that have a view of Manhattan. And again, just visualizing the buildings come down, I can't even imagine what that does to your psyche. I do know for a few months, whenever I drove over a bridge, like I worked in Harlem, so I had to go over one of the bridges. I got nervous, because I'm like, what if they blow this thing up? I did have that anxiety, but you push through it. And again, that's part of the job, where you compartmentalize stuff and the fire department has offered counseling. That's one of the things that was implemented, and they went full force with it because people were going through a lot of trauma. Some people, there was two things I noticed right after 9/11. People were buying sports cars and spending money like you never know when it's going to get you. They were spending money, and then other people went through divorces. It was a big change for everybody. It was such a blow to everybody, losing somebody, and again, just the trauma of you could smell the smoke all around. You could smell it in Queens. You could smell it.
For how long could you smell it in the air?
Months. That was months. Yeah, because there were fires all the way down with all that debris coming down. There's no way to get to it, and it just kept cooking.
Okay.
So unfortunately, many people now have died of cancer.
Right. I see that number. So 343 firefighters is the number that officials give for men and women who lost their lives on that day with the fire department. But since that time, we've had another 306 deaths coming from the illnesses of that people contracted or developed over the last 2 decades. Did you have any health complications from being in that line on the pile, passing buckets of rubble down on that human chain? Did you experience any adverse health complications from that?
I have a blood disorder, and my white blood cells are displacing my bone marrow. It's called myelofibrosis, and fortunately, I don't have any pre-existing conditions. So the doctors say it may affect me in my 70s, which is rapidly approaching. But right now, I feel all right. I just have to do blood work every 6 months, and but a lot of my friends have died from cancer, and it is scary. That's why I try to just live stress-free, and try to have a positive outlook and just enjoy. Because again, we're talking now, it's 22 years ago. I mean, it's a blessing. I met my wife 3 days before. We have a 11-year-old son now. I mean, I'm blessed. So I'm blessed for the time. Some people didn't get the time, So.
Yeah. For many that were young, I remember I was just born that year. My mom was a news reporter, and she was actually reporting on what was happening. But for many of us who weren't alive to remember that experience, it can be hard to explain. And so I wanted to ask, how do you tell your son about that day and help him really understand the impact that had on not just the country, but specifically, New York, for the people who are residents there?
Whenever he asks a question, I try to deliver it to him without any fluff. And he's asked more political questions. He'll ask, why did they do that? And I said, well, they particularly didn't like us, the US. And I have to explain him delicately, like the balance, especially as a young Black boy. I have to they didn't like us. But there's a reason why some people don't like us, but we don't condone acting that way because friends and family were killed. So that's not the way we should live. But I recall that summer there was a UN summit on crimes to humanity, and at this point the US was going to talk about slavery as being a crime to humanity. But during this summit, I think it was some Arab countries were talking about Israel, and Israel decided to walk out of this summit, and the U.S. walked out with them as well. So they never had that crime to humanity thing resolved. Even I don't think it's resolved to this day. So that was the first thing that came into my mind on 9/11, that I understand people having beefs with this country, but that's not the way it should be. But it's reality. It's a very dualistic experience where you're frightened, you're scared, you're angry, you got all these emotions, and then you have a job to do, and that is to try to continue to find whatever you can of people so they can have some, the family can have some relief and dignity, So all those experiences,
Did you work? Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, not at all.
Did you work with any men or women who were Muslim at the time in the fire department?
Well, my buddy Hisham, who we were doing the side job at Fashion Week, yeah, he's Muslim. He worked in my battalion. He worked in the firehouse next to me. My buddy, my big brother, Ali Pasha, is Muslim, and he worked.
Was there a change in how they were treated?
Not that I could see. I didn't work in Hisham's firehouse. I never heard him complain about it. He was a really dope human being, and I think people saw that. And that's the thing about the job for me. Working with white males, I had never done that before. I was in banking, so banking was predominantly white women, and now I'm in a firehouse with white males. And it's just it's like being on a football team. You have to hold a position in the firehouse. People have to know that you're about your job and that you just want to be respected and go home to your family. So I didn't see that. I've heard of stuff happening, and I would imagine it would. If I was Muslim and someone had a problem with me, we would just have to talk about it. Like, what's your problem with me? I do my job. So I didn't see it. That's one thing about if you work in a busier firehouse, and I'm sure every firehouse has problems. I've had a little issue in every house I've worked in, but I just managed it. I talked to the people who I had an issue with. Because again, we all want to work together, have a good experience while you're working, and go home and eventually retire. But some people have to bring their politics in. And so it's on the two men I mentioned, they know how to handle themselves. And I saw them as good Muslims.
Okay. Go ahead, Ashley.
Oh, I was just going to ask, although their experiences didn't change, did you notice the change in the conversations you all were having, being that, a part of a place that's supposed to, create security for people? So maybe stereotyping those that you see around you, or, those that were Muslim, that wear the hijab or anything else like that. Yeah. Did you notice those types of changes in conversation?
No, not on a large scale. No. It's funny how everybody was, felt attacked. No matter what your views are, those 3,000 people, when you hear the names going down, that was just random. That was just, so I can't look at it. I don't look at it that way. I don't have tunnel vision. I have a broader view. Some people, it's easier for them to have tunnel vision. But one fellow had mentioned that he didn't like the women wearing, I forget what you call it, where you can't see the face. And he said, "Oh, they shouldn't allow that." I'm like, "Why?" Now, and we're all wearing masks now, which is a trip. Which that was another issue. It's how silly it is. It's really your mindset. Like, you have to have a broader view. If you've never traveled outside of the country and met other people of different, from all over, some people are very narrow-minded, no matter where you work. And I would even dare say, if the job was 100% Black, there would still be issues. Because then the issue would be, you're West Indian, you're American, like, how it is. So you see a lot of human nature. My goal was to be a better human, or not even be better, but be the best human I could be. Because I thought if I give that energy, it would be received, and it was. I had a good time. I tried to be the good energy in the firehouse. I really did.
So after 22 years, more than 2 decades later, when you wake up on September 11th, what thoughts come to mind? How do you feel on this day?
Today I felt good. There are days that I was not good. There are days where I've actually walked around the city in my uniform and was just by myself. And again, so you're talking about 22 anniversaries. I'm doing good, and it was very nice to see old co-workers and the young guys. Like, I'm very happy that the firehouse I work in, there are a lot of young brothers there, and they're all trying to find their way on the job. So it's really, really cool. So yeah, I'm doing good. Most people are doing good. That, but again, it's just like any anniversary of a sad situation.
Okay. What do you want people across the country to take away from this? On September 11th, people have the vigils, they have the memorial services. What do you want people to do on this day, 22 years later, where, as Ashley said, some children and younger generations have no real connection to this event?
To remember 9/11, and I always conflate it with, we have to remember all the good and bad that has happened in this country, and that's why I'm not into erasing history. We happen to live through that particular event, 9/11, the World Trade Center. Prior to that, because I was born in 1964, we had nothing ever like that has happened. But like my daughters, the things they've lived through 9/11, then the war. So their life has primarily been, that was in the beginning. Just to pass it on. That's why we do need museums. That's why I'm glad we have the Museum of African American History, because when places like Florida want to not talk about stuff like that, well, we can't talk about 9/11 and have all the gusto and not talk about the other stuff. We have to talk about the whole history so we don't repeat it, and that we're not just, raising flags and not knowing why. That's not cool. You got to learn. So you made me feel old telling me you were born that year.
Well, if it's any consolation, when you said you were 59, I was like, whoa, 59.
Yeah.
The last 2 decades have been good to you. So
Thank
you so much for giving us this time. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Again, this is the Afro American newspapers. And so we always want to show the Black side of things. We know that there were people of color there on that day. We know that there were Black people who responded, such as yourself, answered that call, showed courage, showed bravery. And so we want to make sure that you all are remembered and that you all are praised on this day for the work that you did, the service that you and the sacrifices that you have made. So thank you, Mr. Thweatt. We really appreciate your time. I'll give you last words if there's anything you would like to say.
No, thank you for having me. It was a privilege. I went to Morgan State University, so I'm very
yeah. What was your major at Morgan?
Partying. I partied my way out of it, and I landed as a firefighter. Thank God.
I love it. Well, good to see you have a fellow Bear on the line. And again, Mr. Thweatt, thank you so much for your service.
Thanks again. Love y'all.
All right. Thank you. God bless.